Joel, welcome back to another segment in our decking series.
Thank you.
Hey, in this one, I thought we could touch on building on slope terrain. There's a lot of variations in slope, right? It might be a gentle slope, or you might have flat lot, and then you have a fall off, and part of your deck is over your yard that's really coming off at a significant grade. So I was hoping you could help us understand some of the things that come into play when you're working with municipalities and or just how you build that deck.
You bet. So first off, it plays a significant role in design. When you're doing your research with your cities or your counties as far as building a deck, they all have what I call critical area maps. Maps that kind of, put out where the areas are concerned about. So maybe old slide areas or potential slide areas or known slide areas or soil that is not compactable, soil that tends to want to move. And so you want to find out what you're dealing with before you go too far, because that'll play a huge role in cost and whether or not you can even build the project. There are certain slopes where you for whatever reason, there's nothing you can do to work on it. But there are degrees. There are lots of critical area slopes where people have built decks, but it usually requires having not only your designer and your engineer involved, but now you've got somebody called a geotechnical engineer, somebody that's going to do research on the site, maybe come out and examine the site, dig some holes, and make a determination of what that slope's like and what you have to do to hold that deck up. So there are a variety of solutions. They have something called a pin footing. It's a 4-inch steel pipe, and they basically take a jackhammer and they just keep driving links down that are connected together until it goes to refusal. It just won't go any deeper.
Wow.
That could be 6 feet, that could be 60 feet. So the cost is kind of per foot. So when you start getting on a slope, figuring out how critical the area is and getting an idea of cost is really important before you spend too much money on it.
For the average person who's looking at their property, is there sort of a rule of thumb as far as how much slope you have to have before you even start thinking about that? Hey, if I'm building a 12 by 28 deck and from my foundation out to 12 feet, it falls 18 inches. Is that significant, not significant?
Usually that would not be significant. That's not much slope. Usually you'd be fine on that.
Okay.
Once again, anybody can get on. Most of the cities will have great web pages, and that information's there. Sometimes it isn't the easiest to find those critical area maps, but they're in there. And if you do some searching in their web pages, you can usually find all that data. So if you're like me and you like to do your own research, then that's great. If it's just annoying and confusing, call them up or send them a question, because they all have. Ask us a question. Here's what I'm thinking. This is what I've got. I want to know what my restrictions or parameters are when I do this. Most cities will bend over backwards to get you the information you need, because they want you to do it right. They want to be involved. So as long as you're getting a permit anyway, you might as well use that resource.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, as far as the listening audience out there, they're considering a deck project, having it built by a professional. You're doing the bidding and they're in one of these zones that might have some challenges. Can you give a pretty firm number of what the project is going to cost? I know you talked about all kinds of variables when you start driving pilings and things. It might go 6 feet, it might go 50 feet. Can you give a sort of a not to exceed number, or is it really up in the air and there's something hanging out there? Hey, it's going to cost X, but it might be this if we have challenges.
That's a really good question, because we've run into that over the years a number of times where ideally what I love to do with any project is to give them, here's your bid price. This is what it's going to cost you. So barring running into some weird thing when we start working on your home, like, carpenter ants or something, this is what you're going to pay. When you get on a steep slope like that, there are so many variables that we don't know. Like, for instance, that pipe we're driving, they try to best guess based on the geotechnical engineer survey how deep it's going to go, but we don't really know. And so they'll usually say this is good to 20 feet. But what if it goes 30? Well, you're probably paying more for that. And that's going to get picked up by the customer. When we build a deck, we literally have to build framework and put a temporary deck underneath there so we're high enough off the ground to actually build the deck. So there's a lot of materials and labor involved. Just getting to the point where I can actually get a crew safely up to the height where they got to work.
Wow. Okay.
So whenever you're working that height, how do you get materials up that high, and how do you get them to the area you're going to work and up on the deck, and it all requires more labor and planning. And the footing, the pipe is deeper and it's bigger. There's just a lot more things that are going on. So what we normally do is we give it our best guess. We go through, we gather as much information as we can on what the geotech's going to cost and what the engineer and all this is. Those are numbers we can come up with. We can come up with our base bid price, and but that's that is subject to changes that are out of our control.
Yeah.
So if we get in there and there's something going on in the soil that requires additional work, or we got to bring in equipment, that is additional, because that could eat the profits out of a job pretty quick.
I think that's a good answer. I think that's a fair answer. I had heard, and you can verify this or not, I'd heard there's certain municipalities, if you've got sloped property, that some of that they don't even consider as far as like your lot size. So if you had like an existing deck and you wanted to expand it, they might say they don't even count the slope. So sometimes people get in a situation where they say, you can't expand your lot because you don't have buildable land. Is that true? Not true? Is it worth even talking about?
It depends. It's once again, where are you at? What's the municipality? If you're on Mercer Island, that is true.
Okay.
There are things that they'll put in place that you can't count the land towards buildable land. You can only cover so much of your property with permanent structure, and usually that's driven by height off the ground and the fact that it's permanent. And then there's impervious surface. So there's things that are permanent, but like your patio is right on the ground, but water doesn't go through it. So that means there's a drainage issue that has to be addressed. So those two numbers usually vary, and impervious surface has gotten to be less, and structural coverage has gotten to be more. They're trying to put more on lots so you don't have so much sprawl going on. It's been going on since the 60s for land use. But the impervious surface has gotten less, so it becomes tougher and tougher to build what you want. And then say you're putting in a gravel path. Some cities consider it a gravel path impervious surface, even though by definition it'll drain.
Yeah.
Some people consider deck impervious surface, even though the water drips through, but most don't.
Yeah.
Most don't. So it's another what if question.
Yeah, exactly. To wrap up the segment here, I thought, if you have an existing deck, for the most part, can you rebuild it if you really don't change it, if you just rebuild it? Even if you had to take it down and rebuild the exact same thing, can you usually do that, or do you run into potential challenges at times?
You still need a permit, but you can rebuild it. Usually a like for like is allowed.
Okay.
Unless that deck, the original deck, was built without a permit. If it wasn't built legally and it's in a setback or something like that, then possibly not. That's only changed over the last 5 or 6 years. It used to be they would let you do a like for like, and they didn't really look back at old records. Now they're researching it. So if you can't prove that it was permanent, even if it's been there for 40 years, that if it's in a setback or something, they'll make you modify it.
Okay. Well, hey, another great topic. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge.
Glad to.